In 1169, Godolphus, the abbot of Brauweiler, was spiritually exhausted and terrified. He had labored to exorcise a powerful demon from the noblewoman Sigviza, and after a prolonged exorcism stretching into now 3 months, he had perhaps made a breakthrough. The demon, conjured and bound, at least temporarily, admitted that it could only be expelled by nothing less than the magnitude of divine revelation. Only a visionary, someone able to peek into the divine realm, could derive an exorcism capable of driving this demon out. And the abbot knew exactly who to reach out to: the Sibyl of the Rhine, Hildegard of Bingen. Now in her 70s and beset with illness, the mystical hero Hildegard would join battle directly against the forces of Satan, composing and conducting one of the most elaborate exorcisms of the Middle Ages. And from a collection of medieval documents, we can reconstruct just that exorcism ritual, an exorcism that even prefigures how exorcism itself as a ritual would give rise to the Clerical Necromantic Underground. Make sure to subscribe here for explorations of topics in esoteric history, and if you'd like to support this kind of work of providing evidence-backed, free, and accessible content, I'd hope you check out my Patreon and some of the cool merch that we have here on the channel. If you're new to the study of esotericism and you want to get a reliable lay of the land, I'd really encourage you to check out my study guide. And if you're interested in actual historical books of the occult and the mystical, you can check out our rare bookstore over at Esoterica Rare Books. You can find all of those links in the description to this video and in the pinned comment below. But now, let's turn to that great event of medieval mystical combat, Hildegard of Bingen's divinely revealed ritual of exorcism. I'm Dr. Justin Sledge, and welcome to Esoterica, where we explore the arcane in history, philosophy, and religion. Hildegard of Bingen was born to an aristocratic family in around 1098, and she was offered by her family as a gift to God, a not uncommon fate of well-to-do families with just too many daughters, for being enclosed as a young child with the hermit Jutta. At this time, Hildegard was already experiencing mystical visions, often accompanied by excruciating headaches. This is a mystical reality from Hildegard all the way up to the 20th century with women like Simone Weil, but apparently she kept these visions to herself. Upon Jutta's death in 1136, she was elected to lead the convent, which she then moved to the remote area around Rupertsberg, where she would live until her death. In 2012, she was actually declared to be a doctor of the church, sharing that distinction with luminaries like Thomas Aquinas. During her lifetime, Hildegard proved to be a deft politician, a profound mystical visionary, producing 3 substantial volumes of visions, a rhetorically powerful preacher, a prolific letter writer, a careful scientist and doctor, along with an innovative musical composer and the bringer forth of a script and vocabulary that she claimed was revealed to her as the lingua ignota, the unknown language. She even composed hymns, at least partially in the lingua ignota. And if you want to learn more about this divinely revealed script and vocabulary, perhaps making her one of the earliest conlingers, make sure to check out my episode on just that topic. But by the late 1160s, Hildegard had entered what would be the last decade of her truly extraordinary life. Ill in bed in 1169, she received one of the hundreds of letters that she responded to and survived down to this day, from the great mystic Bernard of Clairvaux, various popes, princes, emperors, academics, even other mystics like Elizabeth of Schönau, and monastic leaders all alike. They all wrote to Hildegard, though this letter was unlike any other that we know of. Godolphus, the abbot of Brauweiler, wrote to her after attempting to exorcise a noblewoman named Sigviza of a powerful and incalcitrant demon for some 3 months. This letter introduces perhaps one of the best documented exorcism rituals of the medieval period. An exorcism ritual made all the more interesting because the ritual itself is born from mystical revelation revealed to Hildegard. However, the narrative around the exorcism is also fascinating because the entire narrative, or at least as much as we have it, must be pieced together from itself various texts, a sacred vita or biography prepared by Theodoric of Echternach, an autobiography now lost of Hildegard herself, only surviving in fragments, and various letters preserved in the corpus of Hildegard's surviving works. This puzzle, when taken together and reconstructed, is truly extraordinary. We learn that the energumen, that's the technical term for a person possessed by a demon, the energumen is a noblewoman named Sigviza. Interestingly, her name appears in the narrative accounts, but not in the actual letters by Hildegard, or to and from Hildegard, and this is probably to protect her privacy while she was still alive. I mean, she was a member of the nobility and possessed by a demon. But her position as a member of just that nobility is important here. A central point of demonic possession was meant as an outrage against divine sovereignty. That is to say that the forces of Satan could raid into the very bodies of the faithful, all meant to weaken the faith of those witnessing this around them. You would think something like, if God would allow a horrible thing like that to happen to a noble like Sigviza, why should I have faith that God would protect me? Her possession was also probably seen as specifically dangerous given her social position. But we learn that Sigviza had apparently been suffering from obsession and then possession for some 7 years before being subjected to direct exorcism by Godolphus. Now, what those 7 years of obsession and then possession looked like aren't exactly clear at all. But perhaps we might think that her case took a specifically acute turn in that 7th year. Unlike in the movies that we've all seen where obsession, possession, and exorcism take place over a couple of months, or even a couple of hours, most historical and present cases of exorcism can and do stretch into months and even years. The exorcism ritual itself can take months or years. Regardless, she's taken in by Godolphus, the abbot of Brauweiler, for some 3 months of unsuccessful exorcism. Again, that she gets the specific attention of an abbot is probably given the severity of her case and the fact that her position in society is crucially important. Further, it's also important to recall that exorcism as a ritual is much more free-form, kind of do-it-yourself during this period in church history, and it wasn't actually even formalized until the Roman ritual of 1614, and it was among the last rituals updated by Vatican II. And to a degree, this makes some sense, as the specific needs of each exorcism would be distinct given the situation of the possessed person, along with the specificity of the demons, or demons, doing the possessing. During the long development, a range of ritual practices emerged. The use of sacraments like the Blessed Host, or sacramentals like holy water, visiting saintly shrines, use of incenses and suffumigations, reciting scriptures, litanies of specific conjurations and invocations, along with a range of less orthodox strategies for dealing with demons, like the use of amulets, medical purgatives, restraints, forced fasting, and procedures that are basically indistinguishable from torture and criminal sorcery. Indeed, the link between exorcism and sorcery became so close that it would eventually force the Catholic Church to formalize the procedure. That and those pesky Protestants. But to put it bluntly, if one could conjure and bind a demon and force it from a human subject, a similar extension in logic contended that one could conjure and bind a demon using similar means and then put it to work in the service of the exorcist, now necromancer. This is the exorcist to necromancer pipeline that formed the core logic which gave rise to the Clerical Necromantic Underground, a topic that I've discussed at length in many episodes, but on a specific episode if you want to check out just that topic. Hildegard's going to contribute to that, I think, though unwittingly. But aside from visiting saintly shrines, we learn virtually nothing about exactly what Godolphus's exorcism regime consisted of. Probably a retinue of the things that I just discussed in some combination over and over and over again. But what we do know is that it failed on nearly all counts save for some in that 3-month intensive period. Then there was a kind of breakthrough, a chink in the demonic armor appeared. At some point, an unnamed demon, the demon is actually never named in this text, made an admission. It could only be expelled by the counsel of an old woman of the Upper Rhine. And in fact, in one annal, the demon even mockingly gave Godolphus a clue to the identity of the woman, calling her Scrumplegardus, literally Wrinklegard or Shrivelgard, clearly a jab at Hildegard's advanced age. Probably exhausted, clearly outmatched, and out of options, Godolphus wrote to the renowned elderly visionary abbess he had never met in person, asking her to give him the strength of your contemplation and the magnitude of divine revelation, which was the only means to combat the demon and save Sigviza. Indeed, he expresses that if Satan had beset this woman so, then she must have some important part to play in worldly affairs, and begs Hildegard to send, quote, any inspiration or revelation that God grants to you, to him, Godolphus, as soon as possible. Hildegard's reply is simply one of the most incredible documents in the history of exorcisms, and she provides an elaborate, divinely revealed ritual by which to cast out this demon. Now, Hildegard rarely ventured into the realm of demonology, preferring to detail vast visions of heavenly realms and their lessons for us mere mortals. But in one of her writings, she does proffer an interesting revelation about the nature of demons. There she contends that these inky, globular demons don't actually enter the human body at all. It would rip us apart like casting straw into the air. Rather, the demon projects a kind of oppressive shadow of smoke upon us, binding and afflicting us, with the demon crying out through our body as if through a window, and manipulating our flesh like a kind of grim marionette. There's something just terrifying about the idea of a demon just possessing you and then jumping. She announces that the ritual that she's actually dictating from her sickbed is not from her, but from the one who is. But first, she diagnoses the nature of this specific possessing demon. This demon, again, unnamed and undescribed, is akin to the moral vices of the human being, and hence isn't moved by sacred images or images of the saints or of the sacraments, in the way that a moral profligate character just doesn't care about religion. Thus, only outside pressure, further pressure, must be used against this demon, specifically the fasting of the faithful, scourging, the prayers of the faithful, the giving of alms on behalf of the energumen, and finally only by the very command of God himself will this demon ultimately be expelled. Hence the divinely revealed ritual given to Hildegard. Now, why God doesn't just get on with doing this, if God ultimately is going to have to do the expelling of this specific demon from Sigviza at the end anyway, isn't exactly clear to me. But when I ask questions like that, I'm often told, God works in mysterious ways, which typically just means that people suffer in the meantime, but your theological mileage may vary. But an interesting theological question that I'm going to leave over there. The ritual itself involves selecting 7 righteous priests to represent figures that had offered sacrifices to God. This is Abel, Noah, Abraham, Melchizedek, Jacob, Aaron, and Christ, himself both high priest and ultimate sacrifice in Christianity. Now, with fasting, scourging, prayers, and oblations, they were to celebrate Mass and approach the possessed woman without directly looking at her, armed with ritual rods, like the one that Moses used to split the Sea of Reeds. All of this now represents the 7 gifts of the Holy Spirit. The priest now intones the exorcism ritual, speaking directly for the divine. Now you, O satanic and evil spirit, you who oppresses and torments this woman, this form of a woman, depart. through him who lives and who revealed these words, through a simple, untaught person in human learning, leave this person who is here present and whom you have oppressed for a long time, and in whom you still remain. For you have been commanded, and he himself now commands you to begone. And so by this rod, at the command of the true beginning, that is, the beginning itself, you are commanded to harm her no longer. Conjured and condemned, also by the sacrifice and prayers and aid of Abel, in whose name we strike you, and all the while they're lightly striking her on the head, the back, the breast, the navel, the reins, the knees, and the feet with these ritual rods while using this exorcism. The incantation is then to begun again with the final lines moving now to Noah, such as conjured and condemned also by the sacrifice and prayers and aid of Noah, in whose name we strike you. And again, we go through the whole process through Abraham and the rest until we get to Christ. Conjured and condemned also by the sacrifice and prayers and the aids of the high priest, the Son of God, to whom all true priests have offered sacrifice and offer sacrifice still, and whose name we strike you, in whose name and power we strike you. Remember that language, conjured and condemned? Hold on to that. It's going to matter for esoteric-y reasons in just a bit. A final strike concludes with, you go out of this person confounded in that same confusion which was yours when you fell from heaven like lead, and do not harm her further. A further exorcistic incantation follows, now bearing the distinct hallmark of Hildegard's poetry, such that the divine becomes, and let the height which height has never touched, and the depth for which depth has never plumbed, and the breadth which breadth never encompassed, free her from your power and your foolish iniquity, and from all your arts. Hildegard tells us that if the first rotation fails, a second rotation is to begin, with the priest representing Noah now to lead. Finally, exhausting a full possible rotation, Hildegard herself actually addresses the demon in the ritual, really bringing out the big guns now, such that, O blaspheming and scornful spirit, I, an untaught and poor little feminine form, say to you that truth by which I, a poor and untaught form, saw and heard these things from the light of wisdom, and through that very same wisdom I command you, by the true stability and not the whirlwind of your instability, to go out of this person. Again, Hildegard's poetry really comes through in these exorcisms, like denoting the divine as the true stability as opposed to that demonic whirlwind of instability, all the while reminding the demon that this ritual did not come from the untaught and poor little human form of Hildegard, but from the light of wisdom itself. Now, what's interesting about this whole ritual, as I've laid it out, aside from all of the obvious things that are interesting about it, is that no single manuscript or witness actually preserves the whole text. It survives in various manuscripts and various texts with fragments and letters, biographical accounts, even in the margins of some of the texts that still have to undergo scholarly reconstruction. It's only with a very careful survey of all of this literature that scholars have been able to reconstitute a reasonably correct version of the entire text. But of course, the big question, did it work? The Godolphus writes again to Hildegard with good news and bad. The ritual worked, at least at first. All near the altar at St. Nicholas cried out, giving thanks when Sigviza was liberated singing Te Deum Laudemus, but moments later, Sigviza began to contort and shriek, like any good horror picture. Have I mentioned this would be a absolute banger of a movie? Hey, Sam Raimi, could you holler? The demon had quickly returned. Though terrified of the crucifix, it was able to enter again into this woman because she had not been sealed, now tormenting poor Sigviza all the more terribly. For his part, he performed Hildegard's ritual once more, only to learn that the exorcism would only be successful if performed in the presence of that old woman. And to boot, Godolphus informed Hildegard that Sigviza was already on her way. At some point, Hildegard had a vision of the demon that was afflicting this woman. It was a kind of smoky, black, demonic glob clinging to her. A bit like Venom in Spider-Man, I kind of imagine. And even the great visionary was admittedly terrified of the arrival of this possessed woman. And while the details are scant, Sigviza was confined within the walls of Hildegard's convent. In fact, we even learned that no men were needed to bring her inside, and some manner of rituals were begun in earnest, with local people fasting, scourging themselves, praying continuously, giving alms, all from Candlemas or around February 2nd, all the way through until Easter Sunday. Though simply being sequestered in Hildegard's convent would have meant that Sigviza would also now be a physical, not just spiritual, a physical patient of Hildegard, the Physica, the medical doctor, the physician. Recall that Hildegard had written extensively on medical issues and cures, even the use of consuming elk, the animal elk, in the diet of a possessed person. So we can probably assume that the patient was now being treated both physically and spiritually by Hildegard and her staff of physician nuns. And I think that that alone must have had some significant psychological, physical, spiritual impact. And further, Hildegard, in all bravado, publicly announced that this demon would be driven out of this woman in 40 days. The clock was down. And again, this may have set up some expectation of a forthcoming successful ritual. But the narrative gets stranger still, somehow. In the midst of the exorcism process, the demon was compelled by Hildegard to teach truly on a range of topics, like the salvation through baptism, the sacrament of the body of Christ, the dangers faced by the excommunicated, even on the damnation that had befallen the Cathars, a quasi-dualist Gnostic-y sect that I've covered in lots of other episodes. But Hildegard received a vision that the demon was about to start spewing lies, so she shut him up, the demon now gnashing Sigviza's teeth in response. This period where the demon was allowed to basically teach and preach in public is just bewildering. According to Augustine, exorcists should never directly communicate with demons, given that, at best, demons always mix truth with lies, always in the interest of damning anyone who's hearing them. Yet here we have Hildegard binding the demon and forcing it to speech for the edification of the faithful. Of course, Hildegard basically being a medieval superhero may have exempted her from Augustine's prohibition of communicating with the demon during the exorcism. I mean, she did know when it was going to start lying, but allowing it to teach the public? This is really strange, but note another dimension of all this. The idea that one could bind a demon and then make it speak the truth, compel it to speak the truth. If Hildegard could bind this demon and make it speak the truth of the damnation of the Cathars or something, why couldn't one also conjure and bind a demon? Remember the language of her own ritual. Conjured and condemned are you. And say, make it tell you where some buried treasure is. You knew that was coming. Welcome to Esoterica. Demonology and buried treasure. Like I said, the exorcist to necromancer pipeline was and is real. And Hildegard is kinda accidentally prefiguring its logic by flaunting Augustine's warning, given her super Hildegard powers. But still, the logic's still there. You can bind a demon and force it to tell the truth about something, whether it's the damnation of the Cathars or where that gold at. At any rate, on Easter Sunday, we're told that the priest was consecrating a new baptismal font by ritually blowing upon it, just as the face of the divine had moved upon those ancient primordial waters. Still afflicted, Sigviza was present, and this was day 40, just FYI, shaking so badly that she pounded a hole in the floor, and she began to emit a kind of fetid demonic breath, vying with the consecration of the priest via a desecration of the area. But Hildegard saw a vision where the Most High demanded that the demonic spirit vacate the woman to allow for the presence of the Holy Spirit at the consecration, and At once, the unclean spirit came out of the private parts of the woman with a horrible sound of evacuation. I'm also going to put that over there. But we learned that the long-suffering Sigviza remained healthy in body and soul as long as she lived in this world, though to my knowledge she no longer appeared in the historical record. This would be a fascinating thread to pick up by any bored researcher out there. Who was this woman? And what was her fate? What was her family like? Do we have baptismal records of her? Who was this? But when a dean of the Holy Apostles at Cologne and a friend of that noble lady Sigviza wrote to Hildegard sometime after the successful exorcism, Hildegard is her typically demure and cryptic self in the letter. She replies that just as various believers are required to bring about God's plan for creation, and just as various parts of the day, sunrise, the rising heat of the day, sunset and night, are all united as one day, so too did various believers fast, pray, give alms. Many did their part. Even God did God's part, as Hildegard initially saw, to rescue Sigviza from her demonic torment. She concludes her letter wishing him and all those who supported this long-suffering woman grace, such that we may all have mercy rather than sacrifice from the divine, as she concludes her letter and her last known words on this extraordinary mystical exorcism. Hildegard of Bingen would not survive another decade. Her health was rapidly failing. Even her abbey would come under the nightmare of excommunication about the burial of a local person there. She would be reinstated just before her passing from this world on the 17th of September, 1179. Her nuns even recounted that they saw 2 streams of light flood into her quarters from the sky. One could only hope that they were escorting her to the lights that had filled her anguished visions. But this instance of a mystically informed, visionary exorcism is a rather extraordinary episode in the life of an already extraordinary medieval person. Hildegard's works are extensive. For her visionary works, I'd recommend her edition of the Sigviza and the Classics of Western Spirituality series. Her extensive correspondence has been published in 3 volumes with a selected letters edition, including all the documents from the exorcism, also included and available by Baird. But more Hildegard content to come. I mean, I literally rock a Hildegard shirt from time to time, like it's a metal shirt because Hildegard's kind of metal. I mean, if you hang around here long enough, you're going to become a fan of Hildegard, but we're going to be covering her massive visionary document, the Sigviza, her amazing medical writing, so stick around for a lot more Hildegard content to come. Until then, I'm Dr. Justin Sledge, and thanks for watching Esoterica, where we explore the arcane in history, philosophy, and religion.